When we are creating our slideshows, we're always looking for interest. We're looking to add variety, which therefore adds appeal. And one way we can help do that is by giving some thought to the differential focus technique. Basically, it's pretty simple, but we do need to give it some thought when we're out with the camera. The technique involves shooting two identical images. In the first one, we focus on the background and allow any foreground detail to go soft and out of focus. In the next shot, we focus on the foreground and allow the background to go out of focus. So one of the good lenses for this is a mid-range zoom, and these two images were shot with a 135mm zoom. Whilst I would never say it's impossible to create the same thing in an image editor, in my experience I get much better results when I actually take the images in camera. When you're shooting these images, if you've got a tripod, then of course it's going to make sense to use it. If you've got a solid surface you can help rest upon, well, use that too. But if you haven't, take two shots handheld as careful as you can. Try not to move the camera too much, because there is an auto align facility inside of Photoshop which is pretty clever. Even when we are shooting from a tripod, when we focus on the background and then come forward and focus on the foreground, the lens elements within the lens we're using move so much that even when we shoot from a tripod, we often see quite a bit of movement between the two images. So what we're going to do here is start off by opening both of these images up into Photoshop's layers. So let's go to Photoshop's bridge. Now I've increased the size of the thumbnails considerably here, but we are just looking at a couple of thumbnails and we need to open these up into a layered stack in a few moments. But just before I do, let's take one of these and go to the metadata. There you can see the 135mm lens used, and you can see I used an f8 aperture to make sure that I got softness in the foreground and sharpness in the background. You're going to need to vary your aperture depending on the distance between the foreground interest and the background. Here it's quite a long way. Now I'm going to open these two up straight into Photoshop's layers, and the other thing I should mention here is that I start this process before I do any cropping or sizing of the images. These images are straight from a 20 megapixel camera. So with both of the thumbnails selected, I'm going to go to Tools, Photoshop, and there it is, Load Files into Photoshop Layers. Now I did shoot both of these images from a tripod, so there's not a great deal of difference between the two images apart from what the movement of the lens elements actually applied when I focus from the foreground to the background. But to put it right, we go to the layers, we select both of the layers, just hold the Control key and click the two layers. Then we need to go to top left of the screen, Edit, Auto Align, and in this window leave it set to the default auto and click OK and allow Photoshop to do its work. Now you can see by the little lines that have appeared around the outer edge, it has lined up the images, but it hasn't had to work very hard here. Now let me give you a better demonstration of how powerful that auto align command is. I've opened up two other images here, exactly the same as we did a few moments ago. These were taken handheld with quite a long telephoto zoom. So if I turn off the top one, you can see the movement between the two shots, and yet they are consecutive shots. And if I just drop down the opacity a little bit on the top one, that also gives you a good idea of the difference between these two images. And if I zoom in a bit, we can see just how the auto align deals with these two aircraft. So let's do the same as before. Select both of the layers using the control key, go to edit, auto align layers, stay with the default auto and click OK, because what it does is pretty impressive. Now you can see around the outer edge here that we'd have some cropping to do, but of course if we started off with a high res image, that's no problem. And if I turn the top layer on and off now, well, we can hardly see any difference at all. However, let's come back to our two images here that we've lined up, because the one thing we need to do next is to crop them to the size we want. So I'm going to go to my crop tool here. I'm going to go to my presets because I think I've got a standard HD aspect ratio of 1920/1080. So I'm going to select that, click inside, and just decide which part of this I'm going to select. I'm going to use my up arrow here just to drag that down. I think we need the bottom half of this, but I've got to come in a little bit on the corners just to get rid of those little white areas. So pay attention to the edges and the base of the image, make sure it's right, hit the enter key. I'll hit Control 0. All we need to do now is to save both of these, giving each one a different name. So there I have two extra images in my file list now. I've still got the originals, and we can see the pixel value down at the bottom, 5600 on the long side, but these ones are 1920/1080. Sharp background, sharp foreground. You can try these either way round, but I think generally speaking, and there's always going to be exceptions of course, I like to start with the foreground soft and bring it sharp. So I'm going to bring them down into the slide list in that order, and I'll put a blank at the end. By the way, this is one of those nice techniques which also lend themselves to having an opening title built into the differential focus technique. What we're going to do next then is to set up the two images we've created. Let's go to the timeline to do that. I'll just move that one up closer to my blank. I'll give it about 4 seconds, give or take, to appear on screen. And then when it's been on screen long enough, let's just press play here, and we'll just watch that in the mini player, because we want people to get used to this image. And about now, I would think I'd want this one starting to fade on screen. But I generally would like to have quite a long fade here, because it looks quite nice when we see it full screen. So to give this a run, let's go back to our slides. I'll go back to my opening title and we'll press play and just watch how it looks here. First image on screen where the background is sharp, but now we're starting to fade onto the sharp foreground, and you can see that slow transition works really nicely there. Now I hope you'll agree that that looked quite nice on the eye. Let's try something else. I'm going to copy these two. I'm just going to hit Control C, just move to the right of the blank, and Control V. So I've got two identical images all set up with exactly the same transition times, but the second one here I'm going to change the transition style. So if I go to my slide options here and my transitions, I can choose something else. Maybe we should look at the page option, and we can have the page going up from the bottom here because we've got the leaves and the twigs going up. So let's drop this down, and I don't know if we can see that in the representation. You can see it going up the screen there because there's a straight line. You can see it becoming sharp. So we're going to want something probably in the 30s or 40s here, but of course until we actually try it we're never absolutely sure. So let's give that a try and see if that makes any difference to the way we view those two images. So we're about to start fading from one to the other, but here we're going from the bottom to the top. So given the number of subjects we could apply this differential focus technique to, and the zoom focal length of the lens we choose to use, and the aperture we choose to use with it, then when we add in the length of the transition we decide upon in Pictures to Exe, and of course the transition style, you can see it opens up a lot of room to be creative. Now it would be very nice if you could see this full screen the same as I can see it here. So what I've done is I've made a slide style from everything here you can see on the screen, and I'm going to include the slide style with the download. So what you need to do in your version of Pictures to Exe 9 is to go to File, New. Just make sure you've got one blank down here, because if we don't have a blank at all you can't get to the slide style. So Alt S will always give you a blank. Go to your slide styles, and I'll change the name of this, so I'll put it in a different category, but it'll say differential focus. In actual fact it's having a job to squeeze it all in, so I may condense that, but you'll notice it says you need no images for this because they're all going to be included in the slide style. So when I double click this, there you have exactly what I have. You can then do a full screen preview from the top right of the screen.